Brazil has a very interesting culture and a lot of very diverse culture. Now, what I mentioned in earlier videos, I spoke about first of all, we had the, I would say, well, the Portuguese may be the first that made a huge claim. There were a lot of Dutch down here too, and I tend to believe that the Dutch were here before the Portuguese arrived, even before Columbus. And I'll explain maybe some of those theories in the future. But as I spoke about in the last video, was the War of Triple Alliance, or the Portuguese War. I mean, not the Portuguese War, but the Paraguay War, or also referred to as the Brazilian War. And it was Argentina, Uruguay, and Brazil against Paraguay. Now, Paraguay's had a formidable military back then, and they were pretty strong, but they were just not able to stand to those, and it destroyed the country. Now, there were some interesting things that happened in the past. Brazil had a civil war. The southern part of Brazil tried to separate, and they actually were using airplanes in this civil war. So I will talk about that in a future time. But there's an interesting thing that happened the time Brazil was fighting for its independence from Portugal. So this would have been in the early 1800s. And I can't really, it's probably around, I don't know, maybe in the 1830s, 1820s, 1830s, somewhere around that time. But Brazil was at war with Portugal. And it's different from the American Revolution. When you look at the Brazilian independence from Portugal, it was one of the descendants of the king came to Brazil, and then he decided to stay in Brazil and separate. And that's another story in itself. But while he was at war with Portugal, the biggest problem that he was having was the Portuguese Navy, and they had control of the northern part of Brazil. And so first of all, some of you, like if you see this movie, there's a movie, I haven't seen it. I think it's Master and Commander, something like that, with the same guy that played in the movie, the Gladiator. And anyway, supposedly that movie is about Thomas Cochrane, the 10th Earl of Dundonald. And Thomas Cochrane may be the greatest ship commander that ever existed. But the thing is, he was really his own man, and he was probably so good that he could have been arrogant about it too. But he wasn't very liked in the British aristocracies. And there are a few reasons for it. Like when he was in the Mediterranean, he defeated the pirates. He was basically defeating everybody. But he was also disobeying orders. He was probably, I think he was a little bit disrespectful to his leaders. And it's possible that he might also be responsible for defeating the Spanish too. And I know there's like one time where they were told to wait, and I think he saw an opportunity to go in against like multiple Spanish vessels, and he destroyed them, and may have won the battle in that situation. But this is where this guy had everything that he did was pretty interesting, but this is where it got really interesting. So he went into South America, and he helped. Probably there would be no South America as we know it today without this guy. He probably was key to South America becoming independent from Europe. So he helped Chile become independent, and then I think he helped one of the other West Coast South American countries, which I think was Peru. And there were some things going on between Peru and Chile as well because the leaders that took over, and he helped them become independent. But then they didn't pay him, so he waited around, waited for their money ship to come along, and he attacked their ship, took their gold ship. They had to transport money on ships back in those days, and he's probably pretty good at spotting them. He probably looked for key signs like security and other things, but he attacked the ship and he took it. So then, after he did that, it'd be foolish for him to stay around. So he went to Brazil. In Brazil, the Brazilian Navy or the Brazilian king asked him for help as well. So he decided to help Brazil. So he went to northeast Brazil. I think it's Pernambuco or one of those places like where the I think it sort of curves around there. It could have been Bahia too. I'm not sure. I have to go back and look at that history. But he went up to one of these countries, one of these major cities. It's a major city today that he went to, and he started fighting with the Portuguese ships. And he was very tactical, and I think he had this one strategy where he would kind of sneak up behind them and start like taking out some of their ships. But he was really good. I remember this. I vaguely remember the strategy that he used. But by the time he was done, what was left of the Portuguese Navy was fleeing back to Portugal to get away from him. So then he went to the town where the main Portuguese fleet was at that time, and he provided them with information, making them think that he had a bigger navy than he really had, and they became fearful of him and convinced them to surrender. And a superior navy surrendered to him, and he basically gave the area back to Brazil. And maybe in the future I'll go into more detail about this. This is just a summary. I don't really have time to cover it all. But what ended up happening, Brazil didn't pay him enough for it. So he felt like he was cheated. And so what he did again was he waited for a Brazilian vessel carrying gold, attacked it, and then he headed back to Europe. Now I think he spent some time in jail. He was heavily criticized, maybe not in jail, but house arrest. I mean, he was sort of just the scourge of the British. They didn't like him. It could have been because he was Scottish too, maybe. But I would have to say this guy has to be the best captain in history. You can find his story. He wrote a story about himself. Maybe he built himself up a lot too, but it was written by someone, I guess, that he paid to write write a biography about him. And it's really interesting what he did. And he has to be the best in history. He had a little trouble. He went to Greece afterwards, and he had some trouble there. But all in all, he had a very successful career. So there are these interesting situations in Brazilian culture that we don't really know about. Now, one of the kings of Brazil, it might have been Dom Pedro too. If it's not him, it's one of the kings. He did not want to be king. He might have been like last or second to the last king of Brazil. But I think it was Dom Pedro too. And he spent most of his time traveling around. And I think because of him, Brazil became a republic because he felt like he liked the idea of federalism and so forth. And he traveled around and spoke about his ideas. He was well accepted among republic-minded people in the U.S. A lot of people liked him at the time. He was very well accepted, very very well respected, sort of an intellectual. Uh, he probably he probably had a change of heart and studied, was well read, disciplined person. And it's not unusual for the situation to happen. You might think, well, this guy, kings are pampered and and a lot of them turn out to be terrible people, and maybe sometimes they don't. But I'll get into that on another day. So thanks for watching. Talk to you later. Thank you for joining me on this Brazilian adventure. If you enjoyed exploring Brazil with me, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. Subscribe to Lost in Brazil for more exciting content and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Share your thoughts and questions or suggestions in the comments below. I love hearing from you. And until next time, obrigado and safe travels.